Welcome to Testimony Mountain. It's always my joy to have JessieCzebotar with us today, and just so honor your journey. Do you
Thank
want to
you.
share just a minute about some events you have coming up? And I'm excited to be able to host you here in Austin in May, so that's going to be a lot of fun too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be amazing. So, we have March 24th through the 26th. I'll be in the Tampa, Florida area. I really encourage people to come out for that. That's going to be the second course launch that I have, and it's a live filming in the studio, which is always fun. But it's for the rise of the righteous, and the Lord has been preparing us for this work, like all year, and we're already seeing miracles happen. It's getting really exciting. So I'm super excited about this. It's for all those who really want to know, how do we live out that new life? We're at that point where so many are really starting to live
Yes.
as God would have us to live. And we're seeing the fruit and the outcome from that as we walk in his ways. So that's the exciting part. There's still a few tickets left, so if you're interested in that, you can get those on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. And then the other event to be looking for is in May, the 18th through the 20th. And the Lord's been talking to me about that all week
Mhm.
as I've been planning and preparing. What he's showing us is a healing seminar, and so this is going to be really a time to come into God's presence, come prepared to work on the nitty gritty. That's what you and I are always good at that. And,
Yes.
you know, we, we get to some of those, um, what I call the nitty gritty, the harder stuff. Um, but, the Lord's ready. He's ready to bring healing. He's ready to walk people through that process. So, really, this seminar is about equipping you how to walk through that healing journey and process. And it's going to give you a safe space to do some of that. Um, so, I'm looking forward to that as well.
Well, and I'm excited. I just found out that I do get to go be with you in Tampa as well. So I'm looking forward to both
Yeah,
events and
it's
just
going to be
believing
great.
in the power of the Lord in both to just release His word through you. And
Yeah,
so I'm so grateful.
absolutely.
So we were just chatting this morning about faith and really what that means faith in the hard times. I'll be honest, I woke up from a dream 2 nights ago that was so disturbing. And, I haven't had bad nightmares for a long time, but it was quite disturbing and just crying out to the Lord, help me in this
Yeah.
because, the thoughts that were coming was, how could you lead anything? How could you lead groups
Mm,
of people and teach and all those kinds of things and all this stuff? And so definitely the voice of the enemy was strong, but
yeah.
being over to being able to overcome even when I didn't feel like it,
Hmm.
being able to walk in that faith. And so what has sustained you on your journey?
Yeah, so much. Really, I would say it started even back, in my younger years around age 10 when I had just got out of the system. One of the first things the Lord did was, kind of like directed me to walk into our church library. And where did he direct me to? He started to direct me to different missionary books,
Mhm.
like books by Corrie ten Boom, books by Elizabeth Elliot. I think those were two of the first. And then, Dimitri Duduman was one that came later.
Mm,
Isabel and John Kahn
mm,
out of China and Tibet.
yeah.
So I began to read these missionary books, and were so inspired by faith. Corrie ten Boom was somebody that experienced miracles in her life, and I always loved her sense of humor. That she could look back at that situation, and she didn't see, like, she didn't focus on the trauma.
Mhm.
She focused on what was the Lord doing in her life through that experience. So that was one of the key things that helped me as I began to, do my own memory work and work through the traumas was, you know, where was God in all of this?
Mhm.
Where is he now as I'm walking through this trauma? Where is he? And can I look back at it with humor? And, some of the things like, you know, they would go through my head as I was experiencing the trauma as a child, just some of the ridiculousness of things. And I would be saying things in my mind, you know, that I didn't say out loud, but I'd be thinking it.
Mhm.
And I can remember like, times where I would be like, laughing literally at the enemy. And it'd
Mm.
be like, oh, there they are. They made a mistake again, but oh, look, you have no one else you've prepared. You can't afford to lose that one. Like I would say stuff like that. And, because there would always be that threat of like death through those things.
Mhm.
And, so kind of like some of those things the Lord would remind me of. Or, like even the ridiculousness of clothing that you'd be like, "Why? Why do you have like 10 layers on? Like you can barely walk. No wonder you can't like get your steps right." It's like I mean, stuff like that. And I mean, they would always try to be prepared, and I would just laugh because, even my proctor, the mothers, they all were seamstresses. They would like keep little needles in the hems of their dress collars or the bottom of their dress, robe skirts or things like that. And um, for all the things that happened, and you're just like, well, if you made that the right length in the first place, you wouldn't have to stop during ritual prep to fix it, right? Like, there was just stuff I thought of like that. So, as I worked through memories, like, I tried to, give myself that freedom to journal that stuff too. Like, I remember that. I remember how ridiculous that was. Um, I remember, demons fighting over people or who was going to get to punish people. That was even funnier when they would fight about who was going to punish. And by that time, you're like, well, what's the purpose now? Like, it's hours later, they're still fighting. By that point, the threat is kind of lost its punch, and you're just like, and then they forget, and then people don't get punished, and you're like, well, that was kind of pointless, But, so I try to think of that harder stuff, like, you know, the stuff that I heard, the stuff that was said, the little things that I picked up that I might not, at first remember as I'm focused on the trauma.
Mhm.
It's like what was happening around that scene? What was the before? What was the after? So I try to work on those things. And, you know, so in that, some of the healing then the Lord brought me or taught me through Corey Ten Boom was that she would openly vocalize her wrestlings with God.
Yeah.
And, it gave me permission for my own wrestlings with God to not be fearful or ashamed or um, dreading some sort of consequence. It's like, I'm okay. I can wrestle with God. I can tell him how mad I am. I can tell him how hurt I am.
Yeah.
I can tell him, how frustrated I was that I felt alone. I didn't feel like he was with me in that situation. In fact, I was crying out for him and felt like he wasn't hearing me, in some of those. So being able to voice that with God and to say, Lord, I wanted you to respond immediately. I
Mhm.
wanted you to stop it immediately. Yet, you didn't. So how do I reconcile that? That then made me feel unloved. It made me feel alone. It made me feel like you weren't keeping your promise of being there for me. Um, and starting with that, vocalizing, um, all of those deeper, harder feelings to process in that moment, that's really where it starts.
Definitely.
And then asking the Lord to show you, Lord, show me what were you doing in
Mhm.
that situation? I know you saw I was being hurt. I know you witnessed that, but why did you not do anything?"
Mhm.
And that's really, more of the deeper healing started to take place as I started asking the Lord what he was doing.
Yeah.
And, we can't put a I don't want to use the word price, but there is a value sometimes that we cannot understand um, in the work that the Lord's doing. All we see is our immediate trauma. We want that relief from that. But in the long run, when we see the completed work, Corey often described it as God was embroidering
Mm. Yes.
something, and that every instance in our life was just, an applique um, on his embroidered work. And all we can see is just that, that immediate thing. But, she even talked about how, like, when you turned it over, how ugly the work was with all the knots and
Yeah.
all the strings. And we see that, our trauma. We're like, Lord,
Mhm.
there's a knot. It doesn't look good, right? And yet, what we can't see is that that little knot, how many, you know, um, little stitches
Mhm.
does that one little knot hold together in our life?
Wow.
And if we removed that knot, how many of those stitches would be removed?
Yeah.
And you can't make a beautiful flower, you can't make a beautiful design in embroidery unless you have those knots there too.
Mm.
And getting to that point where we realize that our trauma sometimes is that knot that holds other stitches that make the beautiful patterns in our lives that God is creating.
Mhm.
And that's a hard concept to accept, that God would allow things like that, um, to be the placeholders or the things that hold together all those other stitches.
Mhm.
Um, but we know that in that God is not he's not distant from our suffering. It's something he does understand, to the point where he suffered for us.
Mhm.
He laid down his life, um, went through a very traumatic, um, experience with death, and yet why did he do that? To conquer it for
Yeah.
us, so that we would never have to be afraid again of experiencing that, nor do we have to do it alone, because he perfectly understands everything that we're going through with that. And all of that to take away our fear of death,
Mhm.
to show us that there's life, that what are we putting our faith into? We're putting it into something eternal, something that lasts forever, that we never have to be afraid of losing again.
Yeah, and I think that's so key because it we have to look at the bigger picture. If we just look in the moment, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
Um, and I appreciate you not shying away. Some people go, "Oh, never ask the why question," you know. But I think that each one of us have to wrestle through an understanding of why is there suffering? Why does
right,
God permit it or allow it? If He is all powerful. And it's challenging, because I think we all can look at it from different perspectives, and some get twisted by the enemy into ways of, like God's really not all that good and all those kinds of things.
yeah,
But to me, particularly when we're able to come and see from the eternal perspective, from the heavenly realm perspective, it's like, okay, I don't understand this moment, but I'm trusting you that you work it all for
right,
good and you're there with me in every moment of it. That
yeah.
gets us through.
I think of, one of the most hardest situations I went through was with another little girl, who I've named Grace.
Mhm.
And, I think of her death and, the torture that she went through and how horrific that was to experience. Yet, if I hadn't gone through that, we would have had a little girl that would have died, ritually, without
Mhm.
ever, with nobody ever knowing.
Yeah.
So how many people um, does our story represent?
Mhm,
We're not the only ones who have experienced those types of trauma. Um, and really our story's given so that we can um, minister to one another, that we can build one another up, that we can be that voice for the voiceless in order to stop the things that are happening.
mhm.
Because really the Lord's cry is that the wickedness would stop,
Yeah.
but it has to stop with someone,
Mhm.
you know? And because we experienced it, we now are empowered with the authority to speak over those situations and to stop them from happening for others.
Yeah. Yeah. And the problem of pain and suffering is challenging, I think, particularly for survivors. And
Mhm.
the part of it is that the enemy looks like he's more powerful because we've been
Right.
underneath that control and different things. And so a lot of times the view of God is, he wasn't there, he's distant, he's far away, he doesn't
Mhm.
care, all of those things. And so I think in all of our journeys, we have to realign with who really is God. Do I really believe he's more powerful than
Yeah.
what happened to me? You know, and I know there was a point in my life where, I knew that I had some secrets that if they knew that I knew, my life was in danger, and I had,
Yeah.
like maybe 3 days of just this paranoia because it was like, I can't even reach out to my friends because they're probably monitoring my phone. They're probably monitoring
Mhm.
my email and all of these kinds of things. But I ultimately had to come to the point of, yes, they may be doing those things, but do I believe that God is more powerful than
Right.
all of that? And, if he's not more powerful than that, then I don't know what I'm doing anyway. Um, and so I think that's the building of our faith in
Mhm.
is a, powerful God who is so much more than any
Right.
of this, and that he has a good plan. I love
Absolutely.
the psalm about, I would have lost heart if I didn't believe that I would
Mm.
see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, you know?
Yeah. That's such a great, powerful word. And, that's absolutely true. Um, that shift from the powerlessness to, and being under the control of another
Mhm,
in fear, suffering, pain. Yet all of that has to take place in order to fully understand the height, the depth, the breadth, the width of God's power and the authority that He's given us
mhm.
over wickedness, over those who engage in wickedness.
When you just look at today, in what's going on in the world and so on, are you encouraged that you're seeing breakthrough in what God is doing? Or does it just feel like, oh, there's just more things and revelations come, but nothing actually really happens? I don't know.
No, I mean, we're in a time where definitely revelations are starting to happen and occur. And, as the Lord's revealing things, that's, part of the next step of faith is not just believing,
Mhm.
it's being obedient.
Yeah.
When the Lord tells us to do stuff, we have to, willingly go out there and do it, no matter how silly it seems.
Mhm.
Um, I think back to a gentleman. One time I was in a park and eating lunch, and I was getting ready to head back to work. And as I was heading back to my car, I passed, there was a gentleman sitting on the bench, and the Lord told me to go talk to him. And it was like, "Well, no, I'm busy. I gotta work. I gotta hurry up and get back." And the Lord's like, but we know your schedule. You're always 20 to 15 minutes early." And, I'd usually be 10 minutes before that time just
Mhm.
so I would be, my on time was
Mhm.
15 minutes early, right? So the Lord's like, "You've got time." And, I continued to argue and try to walk towards my car until literally the Lord stopped me in my tracks. I could not move my feet in one direction at all except for towards that man. So finally, it's like, okay, I went and sat next to him. I preached the gospel to him. Nothing immediate came
Mhm.
from it. He just thanked me, and I finally got up and went on my way to work. But how many times does God ask us to do those little acts of
Yeah.
obedience? And what is He really doing in that? You know, in it, he's building our faith, but he's also always preparing for the good works that he's preparing in advance for us and others.
Yeah.
If, who knows what God was calling that man to? And my act of obedience began something that then is going to enable him to complete the works that God's given him to do. So every moment, every day is like that,
Mhm.
where our faith and action prepares the things that God is doing in the lives of others so that, I love the verse out of, I think I always forget if it's first or second Timothy, um, but it's chapter 2, verse 10, where it says, I give everything, I lay everything down in order that others may finish the race.
Yes.
And it's not he doesn't just end it there, but it's that they may, therefore I endure all things for the
Mhm.
sake of the elect, that they too may obtain their salvation with eternal glory. So it's all about, the honor, the glory that that people are due,
Mhm.
you know, and that everything that we do is that beautiful display of what God is doing in the lives of others. And our lives are so interconnected, um, in that it's not just about us. Our
Mhm.
trauma is not just about us. Um, and there's really, this picture, this imagery that it's hard to accept at first, because we want to be so focused on ourselves. I'm hurt. I'm in pain. I'm suffering. But when we get past that, we really realize that, wow, like I got through that.
Yeah.
God gave me grace. God's built me back up. And why did he do that? It's so that now I can go and build others up.
Mhm.
I can bear with them. I can walk them through their suffering, and they don't have to do it alone.
It's so good, and I sometimes I imagine what eternity is like in the place of it's not static, but I believe that, we'll have people come up to us and go, "You don't know who I am, but on such and such a day, you smiled at me at the checkout,
Right.
counter, and that let me tell you the rest of the story, and this happened, and that happened, and that's why I'm here today," you know? And the beauty of that too is that we don't have to do the whole thing. Sometimes
Mhm.
people feel like, well, you needed to stay there until, he had made his decision for the Lord. And it's not like
Right,
that. The freedom is we just get to be obedient to the step that we're given
right.
and trusting, by faith that the Lord has other people that are going to do the rest of it. Um, and to me, that's a big relief, instead of to our family or friends who don't believe, like every time I see them, I've got to preach the gospel, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, but
Mhm.
understanding as we live that life, um, our lives are speaking to them all the time. And in the spirit, we're praying for them and those types of things.
Yeah,
And then when we're called to speak a word, we will speak the word in the right season, instead of just driving people away from
yeah.
faith.
So good.
So it was interesting in one of our groups, someone had just listened to your story and they were kind of like, how does she do that? Doesn't she, um, you seem so calm and like you get by so easily, and they were like, does she experience persecution? Does, different things happen? Because I had
Yes, yes,
conversation,
I
I
do.
was able to share some things, but yeah, so if you wanted to share a little bit about some of the things you've been through and how you get through by faith in that.
Yeah, in my earlier years, actually, the attacks were, I mean, they're still ongoing, but they've changed a bit. But, the enemy really fights for people who try to get out. And, they would show up at night, they would astral project into my room, they would, you know, um, harm me with scratches, things like that. You know, people talk about death by a thousand paper cuts, witches like to use their nails and poison. But anyway, the Lord was so good in that because there'd be so much fear, like, is this really how it's going to end? You know, and in that, the Lord would begin to show me the things that were tools in my tool belt.
Mhm.
Things like, just sleeping with my Bible open on my chest,
Mhm.
that they couldn't harm me with that. Praying before I went to bed, waking up, rebuking nightmares, and saying, no, that's not going to come to pass.
Mhm.
I don't receive that. I don't accept that word. Um, from the enemy. And, I'm trusting God. And he would give me verses to get through. One of the first was that I memorized was Joshua 1:9,
Mm.
where it started with verse 8, even where he said, this book of law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it, think on it day and night. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall have success. And have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not tremble or be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And, finding the words out of scripture that you can hold fast to that apply to your situation, even your suffering, your struggling. Um, which of those words is God speaking as promises over you? And learning to live out and proclaim those promises. Um, I would put them. I used to like take the daily breads and I would cut out the covers with the verses on them, and I would tape those all over my wall by my bed so that when I had attacks at night, all I had to do was just turn and look at the word and start reading. Um, so find places, whether it's in your bathroom, if it's in your car. I used to have a stack of memorization cards that went with me everywhere I went. They'd be with me in the car, and I'd be sitting there flipping through them as I'm driving, working on memorizing the word. But tangible things like that,
Mhm.
whatever you need to do to help you with your faith. Um, Build it up, put certain words in certain places to remind you, that you're not bound by the past, that you have freedom. And that's one of the most powerful verses is, where it says, who the sun sets free is free indeed. And
Yes.
remembering that we're not captive anymore, we're free.
Mhm.
And with that comes life, an abundant life. So, instead of dwelling on the past, focusing on how do I live?
Mhm.
I'm through that. Now, how do I live?
So, um, because I know you a little bit and the things that you've shared, you've had some continued health challenges because
Mhm.
of what was done back then. And, sometimes that can be an issue. I know I had long periods of, health and being bedridden for 6 years and things like that. And there's this struggle of, if I just have the right person pray for me, if I just
Right.
have enough faith, if I just do this, if I say the magic words. But, you've had some lingering things. And how do you wrestle that out with God? Because I know you've seen miracles as well in your healing, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, one of them, actually, the most funniest one was just happened a few last month, we'll say. Um, but I was just so sick, and I had to get ready to go down to Florida. And, my sinuses and ears are still bad and stuff, but it was like I just wasn't feeling like going because I was
Mhm.
so tired. Um, and it was like, okay, maybe I'm going to cancel. And that morning, the Lord just clearly said to me, go.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, Lord, even though I don't feel well, I'm going to trust that you're going to give me what I need to get through this time. And then all of a sudden, I have this vision, and I was seeing Egypt in the old days, around the time of Moses.
Mhm.
And I was seeing this scene of, Pharaoh being after all of the firstborn. And all of a sudden, I see these midwives, and the Lord says to me, these are women that fear the Lord. And he says, I'm sending you down to a place where they're going to help you to birth this great work that I'm doing. And I'm like, Lord, I don't know if I'm like liking the terms you're using here, but really that's what he's doing. That,
Mhm.
miracles, the process of releasing miracles is comparable to birthing.
Yes.
There's labor and work involved with that. So, as I went in faith, he really began to move. And, I didn't have the complete healing that I wanted or
Mhm.
desired. Yet he took me to a place where, the whole time I was there, I was cared for. I had everything that I needed. I was tended to. And, so that was part of the miracle, was that sometimes we just have to walk in obedience,
Mhm.
even when we don't have the healing yet.
Mhm.
Um, you know, there's or I'll say there's different types of miracles. Sometimes the Lord does immediately heal. I've had that.
Mhm.
When I had asthma as a kid up through age 17, it really like inhibited and prevented me from doing a lot. One day I was simply at a concert with
Mhm.
500 other kids, and we were worshiping the Lord. And all of a sudden, the lead singer just held his hands up in the air. All of us immediately just fell face forward on the ground and began worshiping God.
Mm.
And as I was down there, the Lord said to me, I've taken your asthma away. And I never had it a day. How long? It was about 25 years that I never had it until the day I was poisoned. Then it hit my lungs and my thyroid. But, I'm fighting for that because it's like,
Mhm.
okay, you know, devil, you better believe I'm gonna be up in the courtroom because you're not stealing my healing, you
Yes.
know? So I've had to fight so it's interesting. Does God sometimes call us to fight or contend for
Mhm.
our healings? How badly do we really want it? Like the lepers, you know, the lepers that approached him, they went against all social means. They,
Mhm.
basically broke the law to come before him and to ask for a touch, you know? So, how much do we contend for our healing? Some have to be contended for.
Yes.
Others are immediate, sometimes surprising. I had when I hurt the three tendons in my foot, I went through like 8 months of just hell with that. Um, I had slipped and stuff, and at first, those treating the injury had treated it like a sprained ankle,
Mhm.
and they had adjusted my ankle, but what happened was that I had fractured a piece of my talus bone in my foot, and when they adjusted everything, they basically adjusted my heel bone right up against that fracture on the talus bone. So I was just in extreme pain for 8 months, and it was like, "You gotta be kidding me," like, nothing was helping,
Mhm.
and finally, it was so bad, I went to see my good, chiropractor friend, and he did x-rays and stuff and was like, "Hey, there's something that, there very well could be a fracture there, I think there is, and, your heel bone's pushed up against that." So he was able to get the bones to release, um, through an adjustment, and then, like, that helped a little bit, but there was still so much pain and, pain with the tendons too. And then, so at the end of that 8 months, I was just sitting on the couch with my friend, and we actually had gotten a Shonda Pierce video, that Christian comedian. So we're watching Shonda Pierce, and all of a sudden I feel this like ice cold wind come down and surround just my one foot.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's really weird. I mean, it was so cold. It was like ice cold. And I was
Huh.
like, what is that? And I was looking and I'm like, well, the porch is closed. The AC is off. There's no fans blowing on me. What is this air I'm feeling? And all of a sudden it just lifted up. And when it lifted, my pain went with it. And
Wow.
I remember I turned to my friend and I was like, I think God just healed my foot. And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "I just felt this icy air, and when it lifted, my pain went with it." And sure enough, that was when God healed it. It was unexpected, immediate.
I love that because, you weren't fasting for 40 days, you weren't praying and
Right?
pleading, you were doing this.
I
Um,
was sitting there going to try to laugh through the pain. It was like, "Oh, I'm in so much pain." But
yeah. Well, the joy of the Lord is our strength.
right? Yeah, and there's I mean, other immediate miracles. This is one of my favorites. One of our missionary friends in Uganda, they were helping, they always have the kids helping work and they're farming and stuff like that. And but anyway, the story was that, the kids were off in one field while they were in another, and next thing they know, they hear shouting and yelling, so they go running and stuff. And, by that time, like, all the kids who had been in the surrounding fields had surrounded the little boy that was hurt, but he had fallen, and the ox and the plow had gone over his hand and had cut off his finger.
Wow.
And so, as they get closer, though, they just see this mass amount of children surrounding this little boy, and all of a sudden from the center, they hear this, like, gleeful giggling and, like, then praising God, and they're like, "What's happened? What's happened?" And kid you not, the Lord grew another finger, like, didn't even put the other one back on. The Lord literally in front of their eyes, as these kids surrounded this little boy and prayed, the Lord grew him another finger, and, he was able to testify to that miracle.
Wow.
So, sometimes he does the most unexpected, things in our lives, the things that, we think are irreparable or
Mhm.
irrevocable or, you know, impossible. We
Wow.
we serve a God who can, you know, literally raise the dead.
So, what do you say to people maybe listening who have suffered with, physical stuff all of their lives and just really discouraged because the pain is too much? Sometimes hearing miracle stories just is like rubbing salt in a wound. And do you
Yeah,
have something to encourage them with?
I do. I think of a couple people actually. These are real stories. One comes out of Corey Ten's Boom's book where there was a period of time where a woman out of Russia was, basically typing out her books in Russian and they were distributing her materials there in Russia. And she went to finally go meet that woman. And what she saw, was as she sat at the table, the woman's husband went to go get her in the back room and brought her out. And it was this crippled up little old woman.
Mm.
She couldn't even move her arm. All she could do was, just enough where she had her one finger. And when Corey realized that this woman, the mass amount of materials they were distributing, and she was sitting there with that one finger typing out in the midst of her pain and her suffering. And, in that, she teaches what are those things that that hold us back, and we always look at them as those hindrances or as our weaknesses, but maybe those things are meant to be our strengths.
Wow.
Maybe those are the things that God has given to us to make a difference, no matter what that difference is. And as hard as it is, um, unless we ask the why, unless we say, Lord, what do you want me? You haven't healed it yet.
Mhm.
So, Lord, what is your plan?
Yeah.
What do you want me to do with this? And we have to come, I know it's a hard place to be, and many times we get to that point where it's like, Lord, I just want to take this pain and I want to shove it in your face. And I'm going to shove it in the face of every doctor, too, who tells me I shouldn't be in pain right now.
Mhm.
I've been there with my shoulder surgeries.
Mhm.
After my third surgery, I had had two surgeries on my rotator cuff and my labrum. And then after that, I had a severe car accident where we basically sideswiped a mountain going 55 miles an hour. So that shoulder took the full brunt impact as we hit that mountain. And after that third surgery, I wasn't told everything that they did afterwards, but I was just like, I mean, it was like excruciating pain where anybody even moved across the room and it was like, "Stop moving." I can't take the pain. And even my family, you know, they're like, "Have you taken your Tylenol and ibuprofen?" Because that's all I could take 'cause,
Yeah.
I have trouble with other stuff. But it was so gripping, and during that time, I still was doing, chaplain processing classes at the shelter.
Wow.
And the Lord began, people could see how much pain I was in. And it was like, God, you gotta at least just take the edge off this. Like, I can't be at a constant 10. Like, give me a 9, a 9.5 today,
Yeah.
And some of us are in that situation where we're praying just for that edge to be taken off. And I can remember the first, visit I had, it wasn't with the surgeon, actually, it was with his assistant, and I was trying to talk through with him. I was like, "Man, I don't know what you guys did, but the pain is so intense, like, I'm not bearing it like I should, and, I need some ideas to get through this." And he just looked at me and is like, "I don't know what you're complaining about. It was just a rotator cuff. You shouldn't be in a lot of pain." And I was sitting there like, "Are you looking at the right surgery?" I was like, "'Cause you did more than that."
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, we didn't." And I'm like, make sure you have the right date because I'm telling you, you did more than that to my shoulder." And he's like, I mean, he was treating me like I was a big baby.
Mm.
And I was so mad. I mean, I left that visit and I went to the nurse's station. I was like, "No, you tell that surgeon that man is off my case. I don't even want that guy looking at my chart." And I called him a bad name. I was like, "He's a dumb, ASS." And I was like, "End of story. I don't want him having anything to do with my situation."
Mhm.
Well, then, I finally got into therapy, and the therapist was like, "Do you wanna know what they all did?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I mean, they did extensive stuff, like, they took half my collarbone off and, widened my AC joint, they retook my bicep and reconnected it to my deltoid, and this guy is sitting there telling me that it was just a little rotator, he doesn't know why I'm complaining, and it was like
Oh.
it was like, "My goodness, you gotta be kidding me." So I get that, you know, that place of extreme pain, and when I was there, all I could do was say, "Lord, help me.
Yeah.
Help me to speak through this." And one of the things that came out of that was as I was doing those processing classes, all those people saw the pain that I was in, and they also knew like I couldn't deal with it like some of them, like many of them would medicate. They would self-medicate for their different pain issues, and they saw that I couldn't.
Mhm.
And, that I had to just cope. I had to talk through. I had to find other ways to try to relieve that pain. And that became an encouragement to some of them, to not turn to alcohol, to look at, what are other ways I can deal with my problem? How can I get through?
Mhm.
So, when we get to that place, I mean, you're like a little bear inside, intense, angry, mad, frustrated, and you just want to shout, God, heal me now.
Yeah.
Heal me now. I want it now. you know, and when he doesn't, it's like you've got nothing else on the table. You can't do anything but surrender.
Yeah. Yeah.
Surrender to his will. And that's all that we have.
Mhm. It is so challenging, and people around us can make it worse by the things that they say and do. And, um,
Right? You're like, "Oh,
uh,
no, I don't want that." You're
I
like,
um, I'd had so many people pray for me, you went to this person and that person, and I, after years and years and years of it, I just got so sick of it. But we had, kind of made some transition into more of the things of the Holy Spirit and stuff, and so there was, these healing revival types of meetings that would take place. And there was a guy coming to our church to do this. And so, reluctantly, my friend dragged me there. I'm on the back, I'm on the very back row, just kind of like, you know. And then partway through, the guy makes this announcement and he says, I hear from the Lord that everyone who comes forward today is going to get healed. And I'm just kind of like, really, I don't, I don't know about
you're
that.
like, "Okay, God, I'm not buying it this time. How
Yeah.
many times have I gone forward and nothing has happened?"
Yeah.
And
So
then
my,
you're like, "I don't wanna miss out, God. If you're doing it, I want it." So you go forward anyway.
yeah. So my friend drags me up there and I get up there and the guy knows by the Holy Spirit that I'm not going to be healed that day. And so he doesn't want to pray for me because he just made this announcement. And so he turns to his assistant and he goes, "You pray for her." And he goes, "No, you pray for her." So they're sitting here arguing back and forth who's going to pray for me because they know I'm not going to be healed after they made this big pronouncement. And then finally, he lays his hand on my shoulder, and he goes, "One day, all of your questions will be answered." And that was it. And he was true. He was right. I understand now that, the majority of my physical stuff was stuffed trauma.
Right.
And so I understand the mercy of God that he didn't heal me at that point because I
Mhm.
may not have discovered what was really underneath it. But from a from a people perspective, the bedside manner was not really appropriate.
Yeah.
Um,
And just keep going. Sometimes you just I think for me, back to some of those times where sometimes the greatest or the sweetest things was when finally I would hear the Lord say, "I will heal you."
yeah.
And I knew it wasn't gonna be immediate, but I finally, it's like I had something to hold on to.
Mhm.
I knew he was speaking to me. I knew he was being clear that he was gonna bring the healing, and I knew it was gonna be a process. And sometimes we just have to wrestle through with him until we get that breakthrough that gives us the faith and the hope to keep pressing forward.
Yeah. It's a day by day journey. And, you know, often in my journaling with the Lord, they're just like, just, we're with you. Take the next step. Take the next step.
Mhm.
Take the next step. And I'm like, what about this? What about that? It's just,
Right? And it's not wrong to pray, for what we desire or long for. To say, "Lord, let me just run. Let me not be hindered. Let me, just go full throttle." And that it's not wrong to pray those things either, to request it, to say, "Lord, I want to feel good. I want to, I want days where, I can just make a difference for your kingdom." And sometimes it's hard to get out of that. Sometimes we allow that, disability, that sickness, that chronic illness to rule our life
Mhm.
instead of allowing him to be sovereign.
Yeah.
And, that brings me to Dimitri Duduman. He has a great story in his book, Walking Through the Fire Without Burning, um, where, he had been tortured by the Nazis. They
Mhm.
had beaten him almost to the point of death, where he was bound in bed. I think it was 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
And the whole time he was laying in that bed, he really felt like he was preparing to die. Like he didn't feel like he was going to live through the injuries that had been caused. And one day the Lord says to him, "Get up, go run around the house." So many times, right? And he's like, "I'm dying." Like, "Are you serious?" And the Lord's just like, "Get up and go run around the house." And finally, he gets up and he goes starts running around the outside of the house. And in that act of obedience, that's when the healing came.
Wow.
And he didn't die. The Lord raised him up. And from that, he ended up getting exiled from his country. The Lord brought him to America. The Lord established him a ministry here, and him and his family began to minister and continue to bring the gospel to Russia and many other countries. So sometimes it's that, sometimes the biggest hindrances we have, the enemy is trying to keep us down in those moments right before we get the biggest
Mhm.
breakthroughs of our lives.
Yes, yes, yes. So good.
Yeah.
Um, we've been talking a lot about physical and some of those things, but also what about faith for our families? Because I know a lot of people struggle in, my kids have wandered off, they're doing this, that, or, they're in the hands of Satanists or they're in the system. Is how do we have faith for our families?
Believing still that God can do the impossible.
Mhm.
He says that our prayers are not empty or void. His word does not return to him empty or void. It always returns bearing the fruit that he intended it to bear. So proclaiming that, remembering that, you know, that we can't make a decision for our family members. We can't make them choose God. We can't make them come out. Um, we have to allow God time to work.
Mhm.
And we have to, come to that place where we accept His will, His desire, His plan for their lives. As hard as it is, there's times, I've been in times as a chaplain
Mhm.
where people are fearful, they're crying out against death. They don't want to go there, yet the moment you mention Jesus and how to come to the Lord and how to have that assurance of faith, they completely reject it. They don't want it.
Yeah.
And there comes a moment, the one of the patients I had, the Lord said to me, "Let him go. This is his choice." And I had to just step back from the situation and say, "Okay, Lord, I can't will him into heaven. If he doesn't want it, he doesn't want it."
Mhm.
And it was really horrible. It was probably, you know, one of the worst deaths I ever witnessed. Just this man was so angry with God, yelling, screaming at God the whole time, harming himself as he's
Mhm.
yelling. His family was in tears. And I had to say, you know what? We can choose to step out of the room. We can choose to let him have these last moments with God.
Yeah.
And that's the best thing that we can give him. Let him duke it out with God. And as hard as it is, we're just going to let him have that moment.
Wow. Wow.
And it was extremely challenging.
Mhm.
But, you know, that's the truth of the matter. We can't make someone return, we can't make them turn from sin.
No.
All we can do is be that, that person that's always there praying for them,
Mhm.
there to love them, support them, to say, your choice is your choice, but I'm here. You always have my prayers.
Yeah.
I love you. and I won't support your sin,
Mhm.
but I love you,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, that story reminds me of when my mother-in-law passed, and it was just before that. She was a Christian, had given her heart to the Lord, but wasn't really living a lot of it in the sense of, not ever having dealt with her own trauma, which was horrific.
Mhm.
And so towards the end, she was just in anxiety and yelling and help me. And she was on suicide watch.
Mhm.
And we knew, in her heart of hearts, what she wanted and desired, but that, just so much garbage and stuff that had accumulated. And so my husband and I just, went into the courts of heaven and, just presented her as a case to go, you
Yeah,
know, this isn't the way we're meant to die, yelling and screaming and, without hope.
right.
And, giving the example of, Moses and Aaron, God says, today's the day, say your goodbyes, hike up the mountain,
Right? He did that with Elijah too. Get ready, make sure everything's in order.
And so we felt like the Lord said that He would give her a sliver of time that she would experience love, joy, and peace before she passed.
Mm,
And so we were like, okay, all right, that sounds good. We'll receive that. And so we didn't hear from her the next day. The next day, she actually had what they thought at the time it was a stroke, but it really wasn't. And so we were kind of confused because we were like, she's unresponsive. This doesn't seem like, you know, the
mm.
love, joy, and peace and all of that. The next day, she woke up without pain, without anxiety. She had about 24 hours where she was, able to talk on the phone to all of her relatives. Um, and then she passed the next day. And so
Wow. So the
God
Lord
honored
fulfilled
that
his word and
sliver
yeah,
of time. um, and so that's what I love about our access to the heavenly realm and into
yeah,
the courts is we can go there, we can petition. Um, they still have choices to make.
yeah.
Um, but with bloodline issues, there's things that we can bring love and restoration and forgiveness to. So,
And just that praying, from those on the outside, I've had that as a request once where, when I asked the man who it was obviously his end of
mhm.
life, and I said, "How can I pray for you?" And he said, "Pray that I have joy as I
Mm.
go." And the only thing I kept thinking of was that one verse where it says, "You shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace." So I kept praying that for him, and I got word from the doctor, a couple days later. He said, the man did pass, but he said he wanted you to know that he had his joy. And he's like, "I
Wow.
don't know what that's all about." But I was like, "I know exactly what that's about." So, very interesting.
I love that. So good. Well, this has been an amazing time, and I really hope those of you who are watching that this has given you some hope to hang on and faith, to build your faith in the Lord, because that is more precious than anything. Jessie, would you like to just close us out with a prayer for those who may be
Absolutely.
struggling?
Yeah, Heavenly Father, we just bring to you those struggles and we thank you that we don't have to hide, we don't have to water it down, that we can be real about where we're at and what we're experiencing. And even if that's anger, even if that's frustration at you, even if that's rejection, Lord, you can take it. And I thank you that you never stop pursuing us. You never stop your grace or your loving kindness, and your mercies are new every day. So, Lord, we just cry out, we ask that you would bless us, that for those who have been waiting for those healing breakthroughs, that maybe it's been years, maybe, it's been over 20, Father. Whatever it is now, we ask now for the healing. We ask that you would break it forth, break through um, those mercies that are new every day. Break through that new life, break through that new peace, that joy, that gladness. We ask that you would release us to run in these last days unhindered, unashamed, unafraid, not held back any further. Let us be who you have created us to be in the fullness of the beauty of the body of Christ. Let us be prepared for your coming and for that beautiful wedding day, Lord, where we are all joined together with you. We ask for this in your holy name, Jesus. Thank you, Lord.
Amen. So good, Jessie. And just want to encourage you who are listening is this isn't about us working up a bunch of faith or trying to do all of this in our own strength, but it's really pressing into the faith of Jesus. And when we don't have any strength, when we can't seem to do anything, we can lean into him and receive
Right.
his faith for our journey. And that's such a beautiful place, such a beautiful gift.
Absolutely.
All right. So just encourage you to like, share, share this with those who may be struggling. This is about releasing our testimony of overcoming. And if you have a testimony, encourage you to reach out and contact us. We want to hear your testimony of what God is doing in your life to encourage others. So we bless you, and we will see you next time on Testimony Mountain.